Hey people, it's my sister Laura.
Hey, this is my sister Jean, and we're the Reclamation Sisters.
What do you want to talk about today?
Today we're going to talk about the principles of recovery. So the first principle of recovery is that there are many pathways to recovery. So let's talk about that, Jean.
Do you even know what I mean when I talk about that?
No.
So there was an idea that you had to do one thing to get well, and that was go to treatment, whatever that meant, and then go to AA or NA, sort of a fellowship concept driven idea. But really what we have found in the process of many people getting well is that there's a million paths to wellness. Every part of recovery includes components of each thing, but one thing doesn't dictate how you get well. So the idea that I would just go to outpatient or just go to therapy, or if I just go to detox, I'll be well. From that point, how I choose to get well and how another person chooses to get well is that we're all allotted the ability to pick whatever path. And my paths included treatment, residential, peer-to-peer supports, mentors, a sponsor, a fellowship, education, and then I went on and chose a more spiritual, holistic path, right? But it wasn't dictated by anyone else. So a million paths, meaning that we as people in recovery and the people in the family get to choose what they do to increase their capacity for being the best person in engaging. So a million paths is whatever you do is right for you, and whatever I do is right for me, and that path is my own to choose.
So I also hear people a lot of times talk about how they felt hopeless. And how, that's what led them down the road of addiction, or that's what prohibited them from recovering. So how does hope play into these principles?
So hope, which is a huge part of my experiences, especially from like year 2 to, 4, was the understanding that it is possible, because that first bit of time you're in treatment, it's so overwhelming and you've got so many things going on in your life that you feel like you can't fix. That there's no way that they're able to be cleared from the debris of your life. And they could be legal consequences. You could have lost your children. Your family's not speaking to you. And so you lose that hope. But what you gain in the process of recovery is the idea that hope is possible. And when it comes upon you, it almost becomes like a joke. Like, there's no way this is real. Some of the girls that I lived with, we would have this whole joke about hope. The one girl I lived with worked in a drive-through of a well-known fast food joint, and it was so overwhelming, and the whole idea and everything just is kind of, there's no way this is really my life. But the hope shot is like, I have a job, and I am paying my bills, and I have friends, and somebody's driving me to work. And I just remember, her getting to the point where I felt like she was not grasping hope, and I drove through the drive-thru and was like, hey, can I get a number 6 supersized with a side of hope? And honestly, and like everybody just started laughing, because it's the idea that we have to be cognizant of the idea that, there is hope. It's not this despair and terrible future, and it's the work we're doing brings hope, and that hope lets us move forward. Without hope, we just kind of dwell. Hope is almost like an action word that lets you move forward.
So another principle of recovery is that it is person-centered.
Yeah.
So tell me what that means.
Well, it's self-direction. It's individualized. It's understanding that what I know to be right in my life allows the direction of treatment. And it's about me as a person. It's an I program for I'm responsible, but it's also a we program for whatever system you're in. Like our family, or if I had significant others or children, the entire concept of it's, takes a village for everything. So it's about the person driving what they need to do. It's about me. It's an I program, but it's also a we program. And we learn that in part of the process of getting well, is that I'm ultimately responsible, but we are ultimately responsible, and we support each other. That person is the one that needs wellness and assistance and redirection, but so does everybody, and we do that together. So it's allowing us to understand self-direction, self-determination, individual needs, and ultimately having a conversation about what's working for me and what's not.
So another principle of recovery is interpersonal. me about that.
It's about all the relationships we have. We've destroyed a lot of relationships. A lot of people have left us. It's about building new relationships. Some people come from backgrounds where they may not want to have relationships with those people they previously had. They could have not been a healthy support system. They could be in their own crisis, their own addiction, their own criminal or legal issues. And sometimes we just have to separate ourselves. Interpersonal component of this process of recovery is the idea that I have to evaluate who's in my life. Other people have to evaluate who's in their life. We have to look at the idea of what are we trying to get back to? And then we bring on new people, right? So I brought on a whole new group of people that were also trying to get well. It's about the protection of who's in your life. I have a sponsor, I had therapists, I had a peer-to-peer specialist, I had a mentor, I had roommates who were also on the same path. Your family is supportive of you. What is their goal in finding support? Are they finding the support that they need? So the interpersonal component is we have to, again, look at I and we, like, what do I need? And I also brought in, almost like a new family of people. I have like my nuclear family, but I also have my recovery family. And that interpersonal component is how I interact with you guys, but also the people in the recovery community that help me move forward every day.
Right. So another principle of recovery is the idea of underlying trauma, which I have started to hear a lot about in the last couple of years because as a teacher, trauma-informed teaching practices have been really all we've been focusing on. So I have been reading some things actually about that with all of the kids that I deal with. And so I have learned a little bit about that. But tell me how that relates to the issue of addiction and recovery.
Well, I think it's important that you brought up, you deal with children from kindergarten on, and that we look at the fact that children have trauma. Oh. So many issues related to trauma. And that means so many different things. It means not having food, clothing, shelter. It means coming from a background where a parent could be incarcerated or you don't know who your parents are. You're being raised by somebody else. You might be sexually assaulted, physically assaulted. People could be incarcerated and then you're passed around. I mean, trauma is the idea from that childhood is we aren't being cared for. They're disregarded as a human being.
Yes.
That there's no value. And what we find in recovery is that we have value. And so unresolved trauma from any age, but specifically what happens between birth and 18, dictates how we as human beings are able to cope and what our thought processes are and our idea that we have worth and value and our person that matters. And so when we don't resolve or address the underlying trauma, so we can call it unresolved trauma, we can call it underlying trauma, but then we also have trauma from our teenage years on as adults. Have you been in accidents? Are you sick? Have you been sexually assaulted? Somebody abused you? Were you in a relationship where you did not feel safe in any kind, whether it was in marriage, in dating, in your family, stranger assault? All of those things impact who we are and our mental health. And so we have to look at the idea that I had something happen. I don't feel that I can talk about that. I then hold that in and it becomes part of the fabric of who I am. But it also makes me feel less than. And recovery makes you feel equal to. It brings the playing field equal and level. And I realize at that point that I have to talk about those things. I don't get well. I might stop using a substance because I'm in treatment and I'm held accountable, but I will never truly get well if I don't address something that happened that makes me feel that I don't have self-esteem, that I have low self-worth, that I have some sort of thing that makes me less than or not equal to everybody else. So the process of recovery is not also inclusive of just stopping drugs. It's the idea that I have to become fully grounded and stand in my truth to what's happened to me throughout my life. So traumatic experiences are the hardest thing to address, but the most important thing to address, because we never truly, move forward on our path to wellness if we aren't willing to look at all of kind of the terror and horror and experiences that dictate who we believe we are.
Mm-hmm. So like I said, I see a lot of trauma in the kids that I work with. I work with 800 kids a year.
It's a lot of kids.
That's a lot of kids. So I see, unfortunately, a lot of trauma. And I can sort of look into the future and guess which students are going to struggle in life because of what I know they go through now. So you are a recovery specialist, and you're also a mental health therapist or mental health counselor.
Right. So peer-to-peer.
So what would you suggest for these people who know they're growing up with trauma? You know, my little kids now in school, they don't necessarily understand that now, but when they get to be teenagers, they know what they're going through.
Right.
So before they get to the point of addiction, what can they do to hopefully stop that from happening?
So that's where like prevention comes in. And we have like SAP programs and we have preventative programs, the original one being DARE, things like that, where we educate people on the dangers of substances. But now we know, and the beautiful part of everybody kind of breaking the stigma and understanding that trauma is a part of it, and that substances and mental health and all of the aspects of our life impact us. As a young person, we need to understand that there are so many programs now. There you have SAP, but there's also a whole new credentialing process in almost every state, and it's a peer-to-peer. My first credential beyond my bachelor's and in the recovery process was I was a certified peer specialist with our state. They have peer-to-peer people for mental health, and they also have people for substance abuse. And it might be that your parents are divorced. They have a peer-to-peer group, or you're a sexual assault survivor, peer-to-peer specialist. So in the aspect we're talking about, it's I got well, and I will impart my experience, strength, and hope onto another person who's just starting the process. Whether it's mental health or substance abuse, it is a person that is not a doctor, a therapist, clinician, sharing how they did it and helping you navigate it. And so it's more connection driven, I guess you would say. The idea that me too. I also had that. And so that's where that empathy comes in, and it's not sympathetic. We have to look at, I also have something, and it levels that playing field. There's somebody else, and it lets us find kind of center in an experience and moving forward without feeling judgment.
Okay.
Super important.
Okay, so another principle of recovery is the opportunity for growth and personal strength. So tell me about that.
So we always talk about what I'm good at. You know, I'm good at this, I'm good at swimming, I'm good at painting, I'm a great cook. But we have to look at like our interpersonal strength. I'm resilient. I have this ability to see value in myself. So we all have experiences we come through, and that resiliency is important, and we have to recognize that. Strengths are I'm determined, I have hope, I'm willing, I'm able, I'm capable, I have supports, I have physical health, I have things that I can look at that bring forward my hope. Okay. And then the people who are helping me, the clinicians and the peers, the mentors, can then help me use those identified components to grow. We often say, you know, in interviews or topics or conversations like, you know, well, what's your weakness? What, you know, what are you not good at? But we don't want to call them that. We want to say it's an opportunity for growth. It's an opportunity to develop. I'm not weak at it. I may just never have tapped into the ability that I could do it, or the idea that if I took a class, it could be my greatest strength. Like I might be the best watercolor painter ever, but if I've never done it, it's not that I'm not a good artist. I'm an unrecognized artist in my own strength. So strengths and opportunity for growth is another way of looking at what you need to do to become the best version of yourself. But you have to be able to realize what you're good at and what you have. Have gratitude. Gratitude is everything in this process. If I am not grateful and aware, I have to be aware and cognizant of the fact that I'm open to what you have to say to me, and that I'm willing to listen and without judgment and to participate in that, then I'm successful. But if I don't do that, then I continue to fail.
So another principle of recovery is breaking the stigma that surrounds addiction and even recovery. I think there's still a stigma sometimes with even for people that are
family members.
Yeah, that are in recovery. Or are you ever fully recovered? Do you ever say you're recovered?
I don't think so.
Okay,
I mean, and from my personal standpoint, it's you're always recovering. We aren't granted the idea that, this couldn't happen again. Because if I don't fully continue to address these things and there's some point of opportunity for growth in my life and I get to that and I don't address it, oftentimes that's where that relapse process comes in. And so people have to realize, there are people with 10 years clean and then you're like, what did you do? But they reached something in their life and they might have not understood that was what they needed to do. And then we don't talk about it, or that shame comes forward, or, they're embarrassed and they feel guilty. And so we have to understand that that's a big part of it. We have to break that stigma and understand that I have to continually say, what is going on in my life, and then I am a person in recovery. And I think the beautiful part of standing in your truth is that my experiences are my armor. You can't say anything to make me feel less than. Like, you can't call me a name. That stigma doesn't attach to me. It's your own view, because I'm fully aware of who I am. Like, I know what I did. I know that I had a cocaine addiction. I know that I had legal consequences, but I also know the immense support, hope, and gratitude and work that went into that process. So no matter what somebody says, it's like water off a duck's back. It is my personal armor, and you can't make me feel less than when I'm accepting of it. So that stigma has to go forward to the family, though. Like you said, like, no one knew. What do you mean? No one knew. But because you felt what?
I thought that I felt embarrassed, but you told me it wasn't really embarrassment, that it was shame.
Yep.
So I'm learning about that too, but I obviously, as a family member with someone who's been through everything that you've been through, there's tons of people like me who had the same thing. You sort of shut them off because you think it's shameful what they're doing, or they have brought shame on your family, or whatever that terrible feeling is, that you hide that person in recovery, or that hide the fact that the person is an addict or even is in recovery. I mean, you were in recovery for years and I was still hiding it from people. So that couldn't have helped you. Yeah. So right. I think that when other people are not seeing the power that you guys have in recovery, then that right. makes it harder for you. But if you've got somebody in your life who is saying how terrible you are and how weak you are or something because you're an addict or because you're in recovery, like, that person's got to go, right?
That's where boundaries, there's no hope. Yeah. They're not giving you hope.
Right, they're not helping.
But you're also stigmatizing that person. Right. Like, you're less than. And that's a traumatic experience, because you're saying that you have no value and you have no worth because you're less than me. And so that's that stigma. And it comes from our family, it comes from our co-workers, it comes from our religious understanding, it comes from our spiritual understandings, it comes from the idea that our friends would be like, ugh, not so good, what are you doing? Instead of saying, what can I do to help you? Or, hey, I'm noticing this about you. Anytime we make somebody feel less than and not acknowledge what's going on, I mean, we don't do that with people with cancer, like, oh, you have cancer, or, oh, you had leg surgery, you're wearing a leg brace. We don't stigmatize other illnesses, and the disease of addiction is a brain illness, along with many other components. So we cannot stigmatize something that's so critical to address. You have to have empathy. You have to have that, I understand. I may not have the right answer for you, but I'm here with you. And if you can't do that, then you're just elevating that stigma. Right.
Okay. Oh God, that clicked on it.
Go with yourself.
So another principle of recovery is that it is integrated. What does that mean?
So you have to look at it that it's not just about the fact that, hey, little Stevie is struggling with a substance, and if we get him treatment, we have to treat the whole person. And there's a million things. It's that million paths to wellness idea. Recovery is a path to complete wellness, because as we just talked about, there's underlying trauma, there's mental health, it's being isolated and stigmatized, and it's the idea that we have to make the whole person well. And so we have to integrate. It's nutrition. When you're on substances for so long, you struggle with your weight, you're underweight, you're overweight, you have other underlying illnesses that I have to address. I have to address mental health. I have to address relationships. I have to address my employment. I have to address my home environment, how I look. A lot of people have to address skin, teeth. They also have to address the idea that they have to be an entire human being. You can't be fragmented. And so the integrated approach is that we bring all of these things and we address them with different providers and different services. And we can't just say, oh, hey, you went to treatment. Why aren't you better? Mm-hmm. Because I didn't get sick or have problems because I was using. I had problems because the rest of my life was fractured. Mm-hmm. And so we have to bring whole-centered approach and look at the whole person. So, a lot of different concepts related to it: mindfulness, nutrition, spirituality, education, employment, family. And so if we don't piece that back together and make that puzzle whole, that person will most likely, like we've seen, in my experiences, like I would get well, but I never addressed things. So it would be a continual cycle of, well, why'd she do that again? Mm-hmm. And it's not until you address all of the components and address how to bring it together do we get well. So it's really important that we understand it's integrated.
Another principle of recovery is the idea of diversity. How does diversity play into this issue?
So we have to look at everything that a person knows. So it's morals, ethics, values, attitudes, beliefs, and what our family and our community and our heritage and our culture tell us about who we are. Mm-hmm. So my experiences are very different than somebody from the West Coast or the South or the mid part of the country. It's also based on the fact that we had multiple experiences with religion, where somebody might have just one experience or no experience, or they might come from a solely spiritual background or no connection at all. Mm-hmm. They might come from a culture where another sex is dominant and they're made to feel less than. It's the idea that you don't eat things or do things or what we know to be right. You may not be allowed to do specific things. And so that makes us not exposed to all the things that might heal what is, not right in our life. So we have to be really aware of the spiritual, emotional, and religious and beliefs of other people so that we can work to make them understand that they're also capable. It gives them that hope shot. I can't say, what I did for me is going to work for somebody from another part of the country, another country. You have other cultures that say specific things must be done. And if that's ingrained in who I am and I don't meet those needs, mm-hmm. I'll feel that I'm being stigmatized as well. Am I able to move through to my own beliefs and not what my culture says I need to believe? Or will I be ousted from a culture? We have to really be cognizant of understanding the diverse needs. And a lot of families, that's what they do, is make people feel less than, so they put them in their place, and that person holds a position of power, and we never gain that power individually because we can't break free. So the part of recovery that's just wonderful is I gain my own power, mm-hmm. and I come into the seat of strength. And in the process of recovery, from our greatest discomfort comes our greatest growth. So it's moving past what we know and what we were raised with to what is significantly important for your own life to be the best version of you. That's that million paths to wellness. It's integrating other things and allowing me to stand in my truth, whether it went against what I was ultimately raised to believe or not.
So that seems like a lot. And
it's a lot.
Yeah. So what about people that are feeling like they know they maybe need some help, but are feeling like that this is overwhelming, or they've read something that makes them feel like, well, it's too much. There's no way I can do it. And so they don't feel that they have what it takes to make it through recovery. So what would you say to someone like that?
I think that everybody needs to realize that they inherently have the ability to recover. It's just that they have to understand, they have to be open and willing to seek out assistance. Not everybody is going to navigate you through each part of your life. And so that assistance comes from the many, many paths to wellness mm-hmm. and to recovery. So, it starts with the initial treatment and the willingness to detox if you need to. So medical providers, then it's with therapists, and then it's with peers and fellowship supports and sponsors, and just staying in the ability to grow, not only with your strengths, but the opportunities for growth, and realizing that none of us have that full answer, and it will take a village to assist. It is that building of that new family. Like I said, you choose to build a new family. So as I built a new family, I found that not one person had the answer, but each thing that a person brought to my life brought the answer to me. And it didn't matter what anybody else said, as long as I stood in my truth and knew that I wanted to get well. I didn't want to not address everything, that I wanted to be this whole person that was moving forward and happy. But it takes everybody. And so we have to be willing to say, hey, I'm not using right now, but now I need to address all the chaos and discord in my life. So what's ultimately important is that we stay open and willing to receive help from all the paths and all the people.
All right. Thanks, Jean.
Hey.
If you found value in this video, we hope you'll subscribe to our channel. Thanks, guys. See you next time.
Bye.